Hello, everybody. How are you guys doing today? Hope you guys are having a wonderful Saturday. Tonight, we should draw. So, what should we learn tonight? So, the last lesson that we had was... hold on. I'm going to have to angle this, or I'm going to have to angle this down. There you go. All right, that's it. I need help with arms and hands. So, let's do some arms and hands, I guess. I was looking for your Instagram story. I need help. Yeah, arms and hands, I guess. Okay, so let's do some arms and some hands. And let's just draw some stuff. How about that? I'll zoom in. The nose, huh? Okay, we'll write them down. We'll write them down on Mr. Sticky Note. Can we do monsters? I guess we could do monsters too. So arms, noses, monsters, and it said hair. Okay, somebody said hair, so hair. You will learn how to draw a little hair. Okay. Monsters, noses, and arms. Cool. So that will be our themes for today. That'll keep us from deviating so much like I always do. Let's make this angle a little better though, because right now it's looking kind of gross. There you go. That's a little better. All right. So let's start with arms. And as our lesson begins tonight, I want you guys to please make sure that you guys are hitting the like button. Make sure you guys are hitting the share button. And once we get to 20, no, let's get to 30 shares. We'll get to 30 shares and just hit the heart button a lot. And we will start the lesson in a couple. Almost there, 10 more shares, 10 more shares. Let's get to 30. And then we will start with arms. Arms, arms, arms. Arms are fun. Once you understand how everything connects, everything makes sense, oddly enough. Right? Oddly enough, the moment that you understand how things are connected, things just tend to make a little bit more sense. So we will talk a little bit about arms. We will talk a little bit about noses. And we will talk a little bit about everything else. So, did we get to 30? We haven't gotten to 30 yet. We need to get to 30 shares before we start the lesson. 30 shares. 30 shares. Here to help us out. So, did we get to 30? One more. All right, there you go. So, we're going to start with arms, and arms consist of a couple different parts. Arms, in general, consist of your shoulder. They consist of your bicep and tricep, so we'll consider this our second section. And then we have our forearm. Now, our hand is a completely different monster, and we're going to tackle that separately besides from the arm. Right? We're going to consider the arm just up to here so that you guys get familiar with this and you guys can get better acquainted with what the shape is and how it works and how it connects to the rest of the body. Right? And how we can use that knowledge to be able to map out our characters a little bit easier. So, in order to find our arms, the first thing that we need to do is understand where our arms come out from. So, our arms come out from the top of our rib cage underneath our collarbone. That is the local placement of where your arms are going to come out from. Now, your arm can have any shape you want as long as you know where to connect it to the body. And I know that sounds silly, but it could be something as simple as that. But since you already know where it comes out of, you can always add all the anatomy to it and create all your detailed characters if you need to, right? You can get your placement by creating a shape that has this, like, the flow that you want, right? And then go in with your anatomy and finish it off. Right. Regardless of the situation or whatever it calls for, you'll be able to make it easier once you understand the anatomy. So let's figure out and explain what each part of the body actually does that connects to that, and then let's figure out how to simplify it in a way that makes sense to the little like system that we have set up. Okay, so first things first, we have the top of the arm, or arms in general, pivot from a certain place. And understanding where they move from is very important because that's going to tell us how to rotate the arm properly. For us, if we want to find out the little bone known as the collarbone, we need to start with a general shape for a rib cage, right? Once we have a general shape for a rib cage, we can just trace the middle part to take us to where our collarbone begins, which is that little tiny point in the middle of your rib cage. That is going to go to the sides of the rib cage, to the sides. Just take it to the sides. Okay? This is going to be going roughly towards the middle of your body. It's going to create this little tiny, like, baseball diamond shape on top of your head, of your rib cage. This is your collarbone in the front, and this in the back is your spine, like the little tiny part at the top of your rib cage that has a little tiny bump. That's what you're representing with it. Okay? So your rib cage ends up looking something like that. These endpoints at the end of your rib cage don't go all the way to the back. They stay around halfway down your rib cage. These are going to be indicative of the top of your shoulder. So what I mean by that, this is going to be the pivot point for your arm, right? This is where your arm is going to pivot from. Not from the middle, it's going to pivot from the top of your shoulder. And that's going to give you the proper arm placement that you normally need whenever you are rotating your arm. Okay? That's going to give you the proper placement for it. Now, whatever width you choose and style is going to be different, but for the general area or general placement of it, it's going to be that. That's where it pivots from. Yes, you can still represent it as a circle if you're doing it like traditional, like when you're doing it like that, but just remember that the circle pivots from the top. It doesn't pivot from the middle, right? If you pivot it from the top, you get all the cool positions, even for shortened ones, a lot easier. But if you rotate it from the middle, you end up with really weird, like, shoulder placements. Like, it doesn't make sense to me if you don't rotate it from the top. Right? So that is one thing. You pivot from the top of your arm so that you have all the range that you need. Right? That is the natural movement of your arm, and you need to know where the collarbone is in order to understand that. So if you take the time to practice your rib cages, remember that you have a little soupy at the bottom, right? You have a little indent in the bottom from your rib cage, but at the top, you have a baseball diamond. The baseball diamond is going to be where your neck comes and your nostrils right here. So your neck is going to come in right there. So that's the neck placement, all that. Your shoulders are going to come out from here and connect a little bit inside of your collarbone. And then your arms are going to come out based on whatever styling you decide to give it. Right? You can decide to give it any styling you want. But this is the general area where your shoulder comes out from. You find your collarbone. You find the area underneath the collarbone, and then you draw your arm from there. Okay? So, and that is how the shoulders work too. Just the general shoulders just wrap around your body. So, if you have your arm, right, your collarbone, your shoulder is going to go in the front and in the back of that point, creating like this little heart shape or clove or whatever shape that's going to be a little bit in the front and a little bit in the back. Okay. So it's going to be a little bit of each side because the shoulder kind of splits your body in two. So keep that in mind whenever you're drawing shoulders. It's not just in the front, it's in both sides, and the arm kind of splits everything in two. So let's move on to the next part, which is, this is your shoulders in range of motion. Okay. So the next part is, how does it connect to your bicep? Well, your shoulder, we already talked about it being kind of like a clove, right? Is going to be like a little heart or something like that. This, as your arm goes down, I like to draw it like this. I like to make sure that the heart is bleeding. So if it's like a little bleeding heart, that means that up until your elbow, this is your bone. Boom. Right? Within this area, we have two muscles. We have our bicep in the front, and we have our tricep in the back. Okay? So we have two muscle structures that are split by our shoulder. Our shoulder essentially creates the division between these two muscles. We have our bicep, which is in the front of our arm. And then we have our tricep that's kind of like this kind of shape in the back of your, right? It's kind of like that shape. And then it leads into your elbow. It wraps around and it creates your tricep. Then you have a little bit of like no muscle and just like kind of like bony part right there. And then you have your forearm. Okay. Then we have your forearm. Your forearm consists of muscles that wrap around and go around your wrist bones and stuff like that, right? But it's really complicated to think about it like that. So just think about it like this little mid part is connecting and it's bleeding and it's connecting to your forearm. And that is how you kind of like mix in these muscles, right? The other way of seeing it is when you're seeing it from the front. If your bicep is here, your shoulder is going to be on the side, right? Then this part right here, split it in half, like the bicep is like splitting it in half, and then the muscles just wrap around a little bit into your bicep. And this is essentially how those muscles work. Right? So whenever you're bending it, if you're figuring it out from the back, you have your bicep, it's going to split it in half, and it would be right. Draw through your shape so that you can figure out everything that you need to. If you draw through your shape, it becomes easier to figure out where you're supposed to draw your things. Thumb out. So let's see. How do we explain each one of these guys? So as we are drawing our shoulders can very easily be drawn like a little clove. This is a pretty simple shape, right? This is a relatively easy shape. This is also going to be going to our rib cage. So we can draw our rib cage based on just drawing one shoulder alone, because we can and should be able to map out the rest of the body by just knowing where things are placed. Then from here, this is going to be splitting my bottom part in half. So I know that this part right here is going to have a back. That's my tricep. It's going to have a front. That's my bicep. So I already know that that connection is there because of that little point. So once I figure out that little point, I can figure out where the rest of my arm is going to be. Okay. So the little point indicates where the bicep's going to be. The bicep is going to end at the elbow point. So you know if you follow your bicep, it's going to end up where your elbow is. So you need to have your elbow right there. Now from here, you got to realize, just like we did with the elbow or the shoulder, where does the actual arm pivot from? Does it pivot from the center? No, it pivots from the actual point in the back, right? So my arm will always pivot in. Okay, it's going to go in to a muscle. So this part right here, it ends up being like an overlapping shape. So you end up with a shape that's squishing into itself again, right? As you bring this up, it starts covering a little bit more until it ends up overlapping it completely, right? So our arm, whenever we are drawing really foreshortened stuff, should be drawn by just drawing through your shape. Okay? Draw through your shape so that you can get all your poses that you want. So let's see. So also the forearm is a little bit tricky, but now that we understand how the bicep works, let's look at the arm from the back. Our shoulder from the back is that little teardrop, but we also have that little tiny like wing thing that connects to the back of our shoulder. I like to connect that as the same shape. I just think it looks really cool. And it moves with your arm, so it kind of works the same. Your tricep is a muscle that connects kind of like that. And then you have your elbow. And then your forearm muscles wrap around the back of your arm. All right. And then they go onto your hand. So from the back, you have all this little bony area that doesn't really have much muscle. And your arms just wrap, like the muscles just wrap around. So that is what's going on in the back of your arm, right? So when you simplify this stuff, it's very easy. I like to draw like triangles and boxes for arms, right? Because this gives me, again, a very simple beanbag shape. It could be the beanbag too if you want, like if you prefer. It's just a beanbag shape, so I can determine really quickly what overlapping shapes need to be there. I already know if there's going to be clothing. I already know the angles in which the clothing is supposed to be there, right? I already know the angles for the hands, for my fingers, and for my palms and everything. So the little shape provides me a lot of information. But the only reason that I have all that information is because I have the knowledge of where things are supposed to go, right? If I don't know where things are supposed to go, then this is kind of just not going to work out very well. And the easier, like, you can go incredibly simple with your designs, but even the subtlety of little lines that you draw will be better the moment that you understand where things are supposed to go, right? You won't have to draw super detailed anatomy, but look at the minuscule curve that I have there, right? That little minuscule tiny curve that might be like insignificant to other people. It's creating depth that wasn't there before. So, and that comes from your knowledge, from your understanding of things, not from like knowing how to draw realistically or how to draw like the actual anatomy perfectly. It's just from an indication of knowing where the muscles coincide, where they connect, where they mesh, right? That's all I am explaining, and that's all you really need to know to get to this level. So that is the arm in itself. Let's move on to the next topic. What was the next topic? What happened to the sticky note? Where'd it go? Where did that go? Am I going crazy here? What happened to it? That's so weird. Anyways, like I think we want noses, right? We just started a little while ago. So I think the next one was noses. So noses. So let's draw noses. Noses. Noses in themselves are pretty fun parts of the face. They give you a lot of cool personality, and they allow you to be able to add a lot of really fun humor and, like character to your characters. Noses are really, really important to know because they are one of the foundational things when it comes down to like cartooning. You need to be able to draw different noses so that you can draw different characters, different ethnicities, different ways of like, communicating things like disgust and like, I don't know, shame and stuff like that. Come a lot from like your nostrils flaring up, anger, things like that are all very important in understanding whenever you are drawing characters. And the nose in itself is a very, very important part of it. So how do we simplify these things and how do we make them easy for us to figure out? Right? How do we draw something with a dainty little nose or with a big honker? How do we figure all that stuff out? And how do we make it easy on ourselves? Because, you know, like, we don't want to know, like, all the stuff down to, like, the cartilage that needs to be drawn and stuff like that. Make it easy for us, right? Well, I am going to make it easy on you guys. So noses in themselves are a very simple shape. A nose, for as complex as it might look whenever you are drawing it super detailed, right? For all this is worth, this is literally just a diamond, right? This is just a half diamond at that. It's not even a full diamond. It's a half diamond. Something that identifies a bottom and the top, and when put into perspective, gives you this roundness or that depth that you need, right? A half diamond is the perfect shape for a nose. Because you just take that shape and you have your bottom, your top, and then all you gotta do is add your nostril. And you have a perfectly shaped nose. Now, what if you want to do different types of noses? Well, change the diamond up a little bit, right? It doesn't have to stay a perfect diamond. You can switch it up and make it into any shape you want once you get used to the concept of it having a top and a bottom. Now, once you start getting more advanced, you'll be able to use other shapes to create these, right? Because you won't be limited with just seeing something like a box or like a shape. You're going to start seeing thing as an object with a top and a bottom. And little by little, you're going to be able to add different shapes to your arsenal. Now, when you look at something from the front and from the profile, it's very different, right? It might be really easy as a profile. Oh, yeah, of course, Rod, that's really easy. You're just drawing it from the side. Well, how about you do it from the front and see if it looks just good? I'm like, cool. Diamond from the front. It looks even better. Right? This gives you all the depth you need for your shapes, regardless of how wide how narrow right? How pointy, how, I don't know, like perky. Just want like a little tiny nose. Pink. Just a little nose. Draw it from the front. It's literally just that. Right? Or if you want, the reason that they draw anime noses like a little triangle is because they're taking this concept and they just apply it to the bottom part of the nose. So whenever you're drawing an anime character, you're only drawing this part. Right? So that is a very strong component of understanding your noses. Understanding that it's a really, really simple shape. It just has a bunch of stuff inside of it, right? There's a bunch of shapes inside of that shape, but at the very core of it, it's just a little diamond. And then you need to learn how to make that shape have more volume, right? That is where your anatomy and your perspective is going to come in. That is where your knowledge takes over and your artistic skill needs to take a break. This is when you start seeing shapes, like if you wanted to shade this properly, what shape does that look like? well, this kind of just looks like that shape to me, right? Without the nostril, that's what that shape is, right? The nostril is a completely different shape. But if you had that and you had a light source, shining light, well, it would be relatively easy to shade that, right? So why is it so hard for us to do that with our noses when that's essentially what's going on? Right? So it's hard for us because we overcomplicate things for ourselves, right? We always like try to like get that perfect nose. And oh my god, but this artist or this other artist does it like that. They do the little soupy thing, and then they do and then they do this, and then they do that, and then they just barely show the nostril. Oh, how do they do it? How do they do it? Oh, it's such a magnificent. Yeah. Well, it's not that complicated. It's just literally a matter of understanding what you're drawing, right? You're understanding the concept behind it, like when you're drawing noses in profile for your characters and stuff. That's your nose, right? That is the little diamond for your nose if you're drawing a character like that. That is the concept behind their nose. It's not just this shape. Like, it's not that line like that. Don't think of things like lines. Think of things like shapes. And it's going to make a lot more sense. And no, you're going to be able to understand like the distances that you're supposed to be leaving and all that stuff because it's easy. Right? It's going to become easy. Like, I'm not saying it's easy right now. It doesn't have to be necessarily easy. But being able to draw something really simple, right? In this case, something with a top and a bottom, gives me the ability to draw her nose really, really quick. And with just a little bit of knowledge where everything else is supposed to go, I can create a very interesting character that's anatomically correct, and it's going to look good because it's based on, even if you get it wrong, if you base your drawings like this, it's going to be more right than the person that did not do it like this. How about that? Like, that's essentially what's going to happen, right? You're going to be more whenever you're wrong, you're going to be more right than other people that are wrong. If that makes any sense at all. So essentially, noses from simple to complex can be simplified to a little diamond, right? And then from there, you're going to have to learn anatomy in order to get better from that, right? You are going to actually need to sit down and understand the anatomical parts of your body for you to actually understand these concepts better, right? To know where it connects, where does this go? Like, why does your nose come out of there? It comes out of your skull from your little nose pocket, right? Like, that is essentially what's happening. Like, so how does that connect to your eye socket and therefore connect to your eye? You know, that's all things that you need to ask yourself as you're drawing your character. Because if you're just drawing and it's like just instinctual that you know where to place the eye, ask yourself, how did I know that? Why am I putting it there? Right? Tell yourself, should I really, like, do I need to learn anatomy? Do I need to go back and learn all this stuff? Like, it's a constant thing that you have to ask yourself. And if you have to be honest with yourself too, though. Like, if you're not honest with yourself and you keep on telling yourself, oh yeah, I know all this stuff, I know anatomy, I know perspective, and then you go years without going back and revisiting it, you're gonna regret it because it's just gonna make you like have to revisit it anyways. But you're gonna have even less patience because now it's gonna be years and years and years later on, and you're gonna be even more stubborn because you're not gonna want to like, you know, you're not gonna want to go back and like do things differently after 40 years of drawing, right? Like you're not gonna want to be like, oh, I gotta go back and learn my anatomy. No, you want to be at that point. You want to be creating your own styles. You want to be influencing other people. You want to be able to be creating your stuff, right? So, in order to do that without having to go back and like claim back like 10 years of your life later, like I did, then just learn it now so that it's not a big hassle for you later. Right? It's just gonna be that much more important to learn that right now than to learn it later on in your career. Because these are just foundational skills. These are just cones and cylinders and stuff, right? That's all these are. That's all these things are. But the way in which we implement them is what makes the difference. And that's why I said, like, it's more important to know where something goes in the body than to know how to actually draw it. If I know that my noses go in a certain place, right? If I know that my noses go in a certain place in the face based on my anatomy, right? I know that my nose is going to have to come out of here because that's my little nose canal. So if I draw a nose, I can draw any nose and it's going to look good because it's going to be going into that little pocket, right? If I know that, just by knowing that alone, this nose doesn't have to be perfect. No, at all. It can be anything I want. At that point, it could be anything. And whatever I draw at that part for the nose is going to look right because it's just placed in the right spot, even on a sphere, right? Even on a little simple, little tiny thing. Like it already looks like it's the correct placement for the face. Right? And then from there, it's just about learning your placement of your objects based on the anatomy and the look that you want to achieve, right? And then start placing all your elements like your eyebrows, your cheekbones, and other elements based on that same anatomy that you already drew. And it doesn't have to be relegated to a certain style either. Not just like drawing my things quick so that I can get the lesson going, but it can be any style, any way, any platform, anything like that, right? It's just easy to see things like this, right? It makes it a lot easier than seeing it the other way, like, like, I don't know. Like, I just personally never really understood the whole this method. I never understood that, right? Like, yes, I understand the concept now, but when I was like getting, good at it, like art, this was really hard for me. I don't know why. I think it's just because I didn't practice my perspective enough, so drawing around my spheres was really hard, right? Now I can do it and it's not a problem, right? That's like all this is like secondary like now. But when I started, this was really hard. So when I first saw somebody do this, right? And I was like, what are you doing? It's like, oh, well, when I'm drawing my characters, I just figure I'm going to draw where my eyebrows, my nose, and my eyes are going to be. And I'm like, what? It's like, yeah, and then you can change it around. You can move it around. You can get different character shapes. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You're saying that all I gotta do is draw a shape inside another shape, and I can get all sorts of characters. Like, it doesn't matter what shape I draw, as long as I meet those criteria, it's gonna look like a different character. Oh my god, this broke me, right? This made me not think like this ever again, right? This literally broke me. So I was like, what? And then I would just draw random shapes, random heads, and then start placing my elements in different places in there. And as long as the nose touched the bottom, the eyebrows touched the top, I already had, my mouth was easier to find because it just has to fit within that space. And everything else just ended up looking more better than it did before, right? It wasn't perfect by any means, but I was able now to draw different characters, right? Because I was able to segment my face into what I understood was just a little thing called the feature zone. The feature zone, later on, I learned to split it in half. And that was my nose bridge, right? So my nose bridge is going to cover whatever eye is in the back. So I slowly learned how to overlap the nose bridge over my other eye by just taking that same shape, a random shape, and shape inside, and splitting that in half in a curve or an angle, right? And with that, I had my nose bridge. Even though I did not know how to draw a nose bridge, I was drawing a nose bridge, right? And I knew where my placement was, so I could draw anything else outside of this, whatever styling I wanted, and it would look decent. That was a fascinating thing for me to learn, right? Not having to follow the rules of what somebody else put. And then whenever I actually learned a little bit of perspective, it became super cool, because now I could just draw my shapes going a little bit in perspective, right? And now it was just easier to be able to get angles that I didn't get before. Slight angles up, slight angles down. Once I started learning a little bit about perspective, it was like, wow, I can take that same concept and now apply perspective to it, and now I can draw really cool things in all sorts of angles, right? So that just made me realize that there was a ton of different ways to approach so many different types of art. So, but if you came up with like a mannequin, right? And I like to call this your base form. Like, if you understand how to achieve like your base mannequin form, right? Then you can create any style from that base mannequin form. And what I mean by that is, if I know only how to draw a face like this, right? If that's the only way I know how to draw a face, then I can use that. I can be like, okay, if that's the only face I know how to draw, and I draw that face all the time, right? I can start changing that face a little bit every time, and then I'm going to eventually change it enough that it looks like something else, right? Taking that same concept and just changing the angles, the shapes, the length, I can come up with a multitude of things. But now let's say that the character is more so like a normal human being, right? Let's say that I know how to draw that. Well, by knowing how to draw that, all I gotta do to create other characters is create those same eyes, but just bigger. Those same eyes, but maybe a little bit angled or closed. and those eyes in just a bunch of different ways just to see what comes out from that. And that's gonna make you even more versatile. But it's really cool because you already know how to draw this one guy, right? That one face. Once you understand that one face, you can start modifying this. Well, you're like, okay, well, maybe I want to start adding different things like cheekbones and stuff. Okay, well, this guy can be that. This guy could be the Hulk. This guy could be some bearded dude, right? This guy could be anything you want, even an animal if you wanted it. Right? It wouldn't matter. Whatever you want to make this character, you can make it that now because now you understand your base shape. If your base shape, again, is just a happy face, that happy face can turn into absolutely anything as long as you understand the power that you have by being able to draw that happy face consistently. Okay? So you're not relegated to, like, if you are not there yet, don't worry. If you're able to draw one thing consistently, take that one thing and then use that one thing in your imagination and learn how to draw different things with it. Okay? So that is essentially the concept of the base form. I've been watching way too much I've been watching too much Dragon Ball, but that's what I like to call the base form, like, concept, right? If you know how to draw your heads like this, right? If that's the only way you know how to draw your faces, you can take that, change it slightly, make the face smaller, make the noses a little bit smaller, and then just by angling a couple things, changing the position, you can come up with a really cool little female character and a male character based on the same general concepts, right? So be observant, be analytical of what you draw, and then you'd be surprised how easily it is to be able to come up with a multitude of things with the knowledge that you already have. You don't even need to learn some, like, other stuff. Can you do a body? We can do bodies, I guess. Bodies. I'm going to do a quick body structure that I like to use for whenever I do random poses. And you guys can, like, adopt that if you guys want. But, or you guys can adopt the plentiful of other anatomical ways that we can, like, normally do things. Okay, so let's do bodies. I like to do this for bodies. I don't know why. That little shape alone is such a dynamic shape. It just makes bodies incredibly easy for me, right? It gives you all the proportions that you need. It gives you really cool placement for your legs. It's a really, really strong shape. And it comes from just making a little, it's like a half moon, and then your legs just go into nothing. Like, try not to make them the same length. And just like that, you get so many cool different poses, right? If you want to have a more, like, general, like, normal pose, you can have something like that. You can get a little bit more complicated by bending the legs, doing different things with it, see what happens, right? And then just generally start playing around with how that works and seeing how you can make that a super dynamic pose by simply changing a couple elements in the character. Like, you can do a lot of really fun poses really quickly by simply generating a little stick man like this. Right? So even when it comes down to just natural poses, like, For some reason, this just gives you like the exact posing that you need. Like the angles are just right for what I like to draw, at least. So take that into consideration. See if it's something that you can actually use. If it helps you, fantastic. If it doesn't, well, I'm sorry. But, you know, not everything works for everybody. But lucky for you, just by knowing where things are supposed to go, like I taught you guys are gonna now be able to draw super cool, awesome things with a little bit better perspective and a little bit better anatomical knowledge. So it's gonna be a little bit easier for you to be able to pose things better and happier and everything like that.